Is change actually possible? Look, I know we have a sense that we can maybe work out and get stronger, but I'm talking about more fundamental change. Changing who you are. Can you actually become a more grateful person, a more patient person, a more pure-hearted person, more merciful, more fun, actually more happy in the end? Good news, you actually can, and we're going to talk about measurable, simple ways to make changes in the most important areas of your life today on The Chris Stefanick Show. Welcome to The Chris Stefanick Show. We love you guys. That's why we're here every week to give you the tools and inspiration that you need to live your everyday life with joy. I want to thank our missionaries of joy. You make this and all the work that we do possible. If you want daily inspiration, click below this video and sign up for the Daily Anchor. It's how we inspire you and lift you up every day in your inbox, and there is no strings attached. This episode is sponsored in part by EWTN. You can catch this and so much more on EWTN Plus streaming. So usually when people want to improve their lives or a New Year's resolution time comes around, they think about their physical fitness. Why? Because you have a sense of control that maybe I could do X and produce Y result and I could see my body get better. Most people don't have that same kind of optimism and hope when it comes to their souls. Like, can I actually become a more grateful person, a more disciplined person, a more humble person, a wiser person? Most people despair when it comes to that realm. Can I actually get better spiritually? So they don't even try. In fact, a lot of people talk about being born this way. That doesn't just apply to one issue. That applies to so many things in people's psyche today. I just am this way. Or we start to feel a certain way that we don't want to feel. And I give talks all over the place, and I was talking to teenagers recently. And I told them, guys, when you feel a way you don't want to feel, the worst thing you could do is reinforce it and just give into it. So you feel down. So you sit there like this. And you start talking down. You start thinking down thoughts and start saying dark things. And you wonder why you're not getting out of it. No. Hold yourself like you want to feel. Speak in the way that you want your life to head. And guess what? You actually start to change. Just like when you work out, you actually start to get stronger. You can get better. And I got just the man to talk to you about this. Andrew Abela, author of Super Habits. We're going to link to this below in the show notes. He's the founding dean of the Busch School of Business and professor of marketing at Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. And I'm so honored to have you here today. Thank you.
Delighted to be here.
Yeah.
Delighted.
Thanks for doing this. It's incredible. Really, it's a phenomenal book.
Thank you. Thank you.
But when it comes to people's lack of hope that they can actually change and get better on the inside, why have we become so spiritually wimpy?
It's interesting. You pointed out people assume that kind of I am the way I am, and there's no possibility of change. I think that's why there's a lot of enthusiasm around the whole habits movement, because people have realized, and there's actually science to back this up, that if you want to change behavior, you want to change your habits. The problem is they tend to focus on the habits of, as you pointed out, exercise, food, and sleep. Right? Those are, and if you think about it, exercise, food, sleep, that's what we have in common with the animals, right? Animals exercise, they eat, they sleep. But the other things you mentioned, the things that make us truly human, right? Our thoughts, our actions, our feelings, our gratitude, our generosity, and so on, those are the things that we should really be focusing on. And so that's where I'm kind of trying to move us towards, and that's the whole idea of virtue, which is what the book is about. So.
Yeah, before we jump into super habits, why did a guy who's given his life to business start devoting your attention to virtues and habits? This seems really philosophical.
Yeah, it does, but here's how it happened. So I spent several years in business, and then the last 22 years I've been teaching business and running the Busch School of Business at Catholic University. And what I realized in higher education, that everybody was talking about the purpose of higher education is the dissemination of knowledge. And I thought about it, it's like, that doesn't make sense anymore, because everybody who has a phone has access to all the knowledge you're going to get in college, right? Why do people really go to college? To study business or whatever else they study. They go there to learn how to show up on time, how to think, right? How to deal with people. And these are all habits. And so I'm thinking, here we are, we say we're doing one thing, people are actually coming for a different thing. why don't we focus on that different thing as well? Why don't we be more explicit about the fact that we're helping our students grow, be formed in these most important habits, which are called virtues?
I think, and you spent a lot of time in the world of business consultation before teaching too.
I did, yeah.
I mean, probably most of the dysfunctions you run into in the workplace would have to do with a lack of virtue on a very basic human level.
Very much so. Is it a lack of self-discipline, or is it a lack of ability to work with others because you're so self-centered, for example, or is it a lack of courage? These are the kind of what underlie, I think, human success. But most people, as you mentioned, treat them as, well, I'm not a very courageous person, or I'm not a very creative person, and they think that that's the end of the story.
So full stop right there.
Yeah.
Love the title Super Habits. What's the difference between a habit and a super habit?
So I chose the title Super Habits because if I called it Virtue, I was afraid no one would buy the book.
Yeah, they probably wouldn't.
Sad but true.
Super virtues.
Maybe.
How to get good.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
Exactly. So what's the difference between, so habits are a great thing. Something becomes a habit, it becomes easier. The difference between a super habit and a habit. So super habit is my name for virtue. Because a lot of people, even people who are well-formed, don't realize that a virtue is a habit. Implication, you can grow in any virtue in the same way you can grow in any habit through practice. So we can certainly go deeper into that. So a super habit, a virtue, is different from a habit in a couple of really important ways. The first way is, as you grow in a virtue, as you grow in a super habit, you become happier and healthier. If you develop a regular habit, like the habit of making your bed, it's a good habit, right? There was a whole graduation speech a few years ago about make your bed, right?
Yep.
Yes, it's good to make your bed. But the habit of making your bed makes you good at making your bed. And you might be happy that your bed is made, but it's not going to change your life in any particular way. Yes, it might kind of help you, inch you towards more self-discipline in your life, and that would be good, but it's the habit of making your bed, right? But the habit of, say, generosity, or gratitude, these actually make you happier. And we've known that since Aristotle, right? That people who grow in virtue become happier, and that the happiest people on earth are the virtuous people. But what's really cool, and what I'm trying to do in the book, is taking Thomas Aquinas' work on the virtues, which is brilliant, and marrying it with positive psychology research on the virtues, which is good, very effective scholarship. And so, for example, there's a number of studies on the virtue of gratitude. People like to study gratitude because it's easy to provoke gratitude in people. Apparently, all you need to do is keep a gratitude diary, and every night write down things you're grateful for, and that actually builds the virtue of gratitude, the habit of gratitude. Wow. So there's a number of studies. One of them in particular stands out, where they took two groups of people, one group almost identical, matched, demographically and so on. One group is doing this daily gratitude journal, and the other group is not. After about 2 months, the group that doing the gratitude journal, so the groups growing in gratitude, have significantly lower mental and physical problems. So if you had anxiety, it's gone down. If you had depression, it's gone down. You're also happier,
Wow.
So physically, and also chronic pain goes down as well.
Jeez.
Just from growing in gratitude. And then, so I'm reading across all of these different research, all these different virtues, and it's the same story again and again. Not only does it become easier, but you become happier and you become healthier. How cool is that? Right?
I love this.
Yeah, and so that's the one way in which a super habit is different from a regular habit.
I also love. I'm going to pause here
Sure.
for 1 second, man, because I'm so struck by that. You could build a virtue as simply as you could build a habit, and just how frankly, I don't want to lose the classic language around words like virtue, but when you add in something so simple, it just makes it so less threatening.
Yes.
When you talk about a virtue and becoming grateful, again, the average person watching, well, I'm just not grateful. Well, it literally, you can form that like you can form, I'm a guy who now makes his bed.
Exactly. Exactly.
And if I keep making my bed, it becomes easy to make my bed. If I keep writing in a gratitude journal, I literally change.
Yes.
That's so cool.
We call it second nature, right? Your nature changes, right? You're now a more grateful person. I think it's really exciting. I think it's really encouraging, right? Because it says all of this is open to anybody who wants. Yeah. And then the other difference between a super habit and a regular habit is the scope of the thing. So back to the making your bed, it makes you good at making your bed. in the habit of brushing your teeth makes you good at brushing your teeth. But a virtue, so I'll pick another example, restraint is one of the virtues. And that's the habit of being able to say no when you have an inclination to do something dumb. Say something dumb or something trivial or pointless or wasteful, And so if you practice saying no to a thing, so for example, I used to have the bad habit of mid-afternoon, I'm hungry, I'm a little tired, I grab a candy bar, That keeps me going for another hour, and then I really crash, so bad habit. So the virtue of restraint would be, okay, now practice when you feel like a candy bar in the mid-afternoon, have a piece of fruit instead, Tiny little change like that starts to build up the super habit, the virtue of restraint, but it's not just, this is the amazing difference, it's not just going to apply to your afternoon candy fix. It will apply to any aspect of restraint. So not cussing out somebody or not, you're on Amazon and you see something cool and you want to click to buy. And you say, no, I'll wait, So the beauty about the super habits versus regular habits is they have a much wider scope. So we have a lot of football players in the Busch School. And I'll say to them, the courage you build on the football field, the virtue of courage you build because people are smashing into you and so on, you have to cultivate that. You can use that to give a speech. You can use that to interview. You can use that to make a sales call. So they're much more portable, the virtues. So those are the two big different ways. They make you happier and healthier, and they have a much wider scope. So
Partly why holistic human formation has to do with way more than a study of a particular science.
Exactly. It's the whole breadth of the virtues.
Yeah, I think of John Paul II being so great at preaching. Well, he spent years in doing theater too. Like the whole thing, analogously by weightlifting. If I can lift a 10-pound weight because I've worked myself up to that, or 25-pound, I could lift a 10 or 25-pound anything.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a great analogy. That's a great analogy. Yeah.
So we've been talking about this since Aristotle and Aquinas, and I mean, it is sad how. Is it because we become more utilitarian that we've spoken less about this? Because the virtues, they make you more successful, but I think a primary focus is just how to live a good life and be happy. Yeah. Why have we veered from focusing on that to focusing on building so many other skills that I guess make you successful? Where have we lost our way?
I think a big part of it is what they call semantic drift, where the words have shifted in their meanings, And Alistair MacIntyre, a great Catholic philosopher who just passed away, right, tells in his book After Virtue, he tells the whole story how basically after the Reformation and the fracture of Christianity, people started to have dueling lists of virtues until the whole thing became rather meaningless. And so eventually the word virtue itself lost the meaning that it used to have, which was a habit of excellence. And now you ask the average person, even somebody who's well-formed, and say, well, what does virtue mean to you? And they would say things like, well, either on the negative, virtue signaling, just showing off, pretending to be a good person.
Wow.
Or it just means kind of like basic morality, or even worse, being moralistic,
Wow.
And you lose that sense of all-round excellence. As a result, we have this fabulous tool, if you will, fabulous insight into how to grow and be happy as a person that was kind of lost. And that's what I'm trying to do with the book, is say, come on, we can get this back.
And we get this, you get everything else with it.
Exactly.
Right? C.S. Lewis, put first things first, get second things thrown in. Put second things first, you lose both first and second
First and
things.
second, precisely.
That's it.
And that's what's happened, I think, right? That's what's happened, yeah.
We have.
Yeah.
Or we succeed and don't know why. Like, I got the money because I read all the self-help books, and I'm still not happy. What do I do with it?
Well, you see people who do succeed, it's because they've actually cultivated certain virtues, but they don't even know that, They wouldn't be able to point to that. And so then when they're raising their kids, they don't know what to pass on. They don't really know how they did it, So,
wow.
Yeah.
Boy, I love this. How does the modern science around neurolinguistic programming and neuroplasticity sync with the ancient wisdom around virtue and philosophy?
It actually syncs very well. Neuroplasticity, in fact, is a really interesting discovery. The idea that our brains can always, you can kind of, they change. So when I practice doing something, when I create a habit, establish a habit, that's actually creating new pathways in my brain. And so when we say you're actually changed by a new habit, and even more by a super habit, it's because your brain is actually changing. And the good news is that this happens very easily with young people, but it can happen throughout our lives. So we're never stuck. We can always build a new virtue. Anyone can grow in any virtue at any stage in your life, which is really encouraging.
Wow.
Right?
So literally, there's actual neurological changes.
Actual physical changes in the brain.
That's
yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
And obviously spiritual changes. But that's the part that a lot of people
Will ignore.
the
But
self-help world overlook. But
Yeah,
it's real.
it
It's
is.
all real.
It's
It's all
very real.
connected.
It's very real.
I love this quote from Chesterton about virtue. This is beautiful. Virtue is not the absence of vices or the avoidance of moral dangers. Virtue is a vivid and separate thing. Mercy does not mean not being cruel or sparing people revenge or punishment. It means a plain and positive thing like the sun, which one has either seen or not seen. I think one reason people are scared away from concepts like virtue is they think that it's the negative, right?
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
doing something. So purity means I'm white-knuckling it, and if I have the virtue of purity, I have the strength to white-knuckle it for my entire life and deprive myself. But Chesterton says here, no. It's not an absence of, it's a presence of something else. What's the difference? Though, I mean, building the virtue requires the phase of self-denial and self-control, and it's frankly unenjoyable. But I think of my own teenage years, right? I had a massive battle, which probably every teenage boy has, with purity.
Yeah.
And it was like it was brutal. I mean, I was white knuckling. I was like sacrificing, but I noticed a change when I passed to the other side, where I felt joy that I could look at a woman and see a person.
Yeah.
And I felt like, and when I was tempted to sin, I thought, gosh, I don't want to go back to that slavery. Like that became unattractive.
Yeah.
So I went from self-control to virtue. But how do you define the difference between the two? How do you know when you cross from one to the other?
Well, the white knuckling is such a good image, and a warning in a sense. There's a friend of mine who tells this joke. He says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was no." Right, right, and that's often, especially young people. That's the way they.
I just snorted. Sorry.
But that's the way they see it,
That's
right?
really funny.
Yeah, and it's just like, what a drag. And you look ahead and you got the whole rest of my life saying no and white knuckling and can I even do this? Do I even want to do this?
Yeah.
And it's a complete misunderstanding of virtue. I'm going to say something radical, and it's going to sound untrue, but virtue is ultimately not just about being good; it's about feeling good.
Wow.
Oh my gosh, is this guy some kind of pop psychologist? Yeah. No, what it means is we have to recognize that the desires we have within us are created by God, right? So they're good desires. They are flawed because of original sin. But growth in virtue, particularly the virtues related to our desires, is not about white-knuckling it. It's about redirecting those desires into more positive ways. So self-discipline, or what we used to call temperance, another example of semantic drift. Now when you hear the word temperance, you think it's just about alcohol, right? But temperantia means self-discipline, right? The habit of only following your desires when it makes sense to do so, right? And so instead of so every virtue, as I think this is something that people know about virtues, is that they typically have two opposing vices, right? Too much and too little. And so with respect to self-discipline, one stream of psychology says happiness comes from giving into your feelings. Well, we know that's catastrophic, right? If you just always follow your feelings, disaster. Aquinas gives the analogy of somebody being a charioteer, and the wild horses driving pulling your chariot are your feelings. If you let them run wherever they're going to go, they're ultimately going to flip the chariot and you're going to die, right? Something bad's going to happen. But maybe not equal, but the opposite error is to hamstring those horses or try and kill them, because then you won't go anywhere.
Wow.
And people will say to me, young people will say, well, I have trouble finding motivation. Well, if you have been stuffing your emotions, your feelings, because you're afraid of them, you won't have any motivation because our emotions motivate, right? Dang. So you don't want to stuff them. You don't want to let them run free. You want to tutor them. You want to coach them. You want to train them in a certain sense, So when I have a desire that I think that's not a good desire, I have to think, okay, how can I redirect that desire in a more constructive way? So the candy bar to the fruit is the example that I gave before, married man from every other woman to just your spouse, it would be hell to go through life always having to white knuckle your desire for other women, and that would be sick, you know.
Yeah,
But instead, your desire now is for your wife and for your wife only, and that's a joyous thing, and it actually becomes easy. That's the good news. It's not the question of no, no, no. It's like, okay, now the desires are going the direction that God intended. My life is so much better, and that's what true self-discipline is. It's not being really strong in resisting. It's okay. My desires are now tutored. That's ultimate. Isn't that joyous?
Oh,
yeah, yeah,
gorgeous.
Yeah.
I think of John 15:11. I've told you these things so my joy may be in you. That's not pop psychology. That's Jesus.
That's exactly. Exactly. Amen. Amen. Yeah.
His vision for us was an eternal wedding banquet.
Yes.
As you're talking too with your beautiful Maltese accent, and don't confuse it with other accents. That's just specifically Maltese. There's a Maltese falcon sitting right here. I'm just thinking of Catholic cultures that have been trained, formed in this theology and this ethic of virtue and avoiding the two extremes. I mean, these are the people that, you know, in the heart of Western civilization, in the Mediterranean, dang, they know how to enjoy life.
Exactly.
You know, and you go to places that have become more Calvinistic or maybe fell into Jansenism. You could Google that one later, but fell into extremes, and you can see it honestly in some Catholic circles now that if there's a knee-jerk reaction to the world and Christianity becomes about just making myself safe and figuring out the system that's going to help me not go to hell and avoid the insanity around me, which I get it because the world has gotten real crazy. It lacks joy. I mean, they're doing the thing. I'm not going to say that they're completely getting it wrong, but
and there's the danger of becoming a clanging cymbal and a gong.
That's,
like St. Paul, right? You want to do what you're supposed to do, but you want to find the joy in it, and it is by growing in virtue. That is the way. That is the way to do it, right? So
some of the holiest people I've met have looked so relaxed.
Yeah, because they're living these virtues.
Yeah.
It's a key thing about the virtues. They're not kind of a nice tool that could make your journey better. They are the way forward. The way to live the Christian life, the way to live a flourishing life, is to live the virtues, right? And we need to just kind of rediscover that. Yeah.
Thank God. Thank God for the ancients. Thank God for the philosophers. Thank God for the marriage of Athens and Jerusalem, right?
Amen. Yeah.
Because it's so helpful to put language, metaphysical language around these realities.
Exactly.
And speaking about more language around this, Aquinas has a really helpful tool and thread that you pull out in this book. If someone's watching right now thinking, these are great ideas, I want to be more wise, or I want to be more humble, or I want to be more merciful, that's so big that could be so daunting. Like, where do I begin? And if we say, well, just practice being more merciful, that might be like someone saying, I want to weight lift, and me saying, okay, here's a 300-pound weight. Start trying to lift it until you can lift it, Right. Like, no, start with the bar. Right? So Aquinas has a system that you tease out in this book.
Yes.
That there's not just the major virtue, but there's subsets under the virtue.
Yes.
That are a little easier to grab onto.
Yes.
So spell that out for us. What's that look like?
So to give you an example, we were talking about self-discipline before.
Yeah.
If somebody's struggling to grow in self-discipline, so the insight that Aquinas shows you is that you have each of the big ones, the cardinal virtues, has a whole bunch of what he calls allied virtues. So self-discipline has 15 different ones. So I already mentioned restraint. That would be one.
Okay.
But things like humility and orderliness and forgiveness and so on are all types of self-discipline. And so
humility, orderliness, forgiveness.
So humility is the virtue that helps us deal with the desire to do great things. And you would say, well, why do you need help with that? Isn't it good to have a desire to do great things? Yeah, and we all have desires, and particularly young people have desires to save the world and save the planet and end abortion and feed the hungry, and these are all great things. But if you try to take on something that is so beyond your capabilities, you end up falling flat on your face, you end up wasting a lot of time, other people's time, resources, and so on. And so what humility is not the habit of debasing yourself. So I'm so useless. Humility, Aquinas makes clear, is the habit of having an accurate understanding of yourself and your abilities. And so too much, an overinflated view of yourself is pride, right? That's I think I can do so many great things and beyond what is realistic. And then the opposite, we don't have a word for it, but we refer to as false humility. Oh, I'm such a loser, I can't, both of those are opposing to the virtue of humility. But if we grow in humility, it doesn't mean you shouldn't try to do things that are be a stretch. That's good. But humility stops us from doing things that are kind of beyond realistic for us, you know. So that's just one example. It's a desire to do great things. Humility is the virtue. Restraint, which I mentioned before, is for the desire to do petty things, and it governs that.
Wow.
Forgiveness is for the desire for revenge, right? Somebody did something nasty to me. I desire to get them, you know, and that desire sits inside me and poisons me. I've heard somebody say, is when you haven't forgiven somebody who did something bad to you, it's like letting them live rent-free in your head. They're there and they're bugging you, and they've moved on. They don't even remember you exist, but they're ruining your life. You forgive, and that helps you deal with that desire for revenge. You know, so there's 15 of these different ones,
and they all have to do with moderating desire and temperance in the end.
Exactly, right. And so, but if you're trying to grow in self-discipline itself, and you're finding that hard, of course it's hard. That's like 15 different virtues you're trying to build at once. So don't do that, you know. Pick one of them and pick the bar, you know. So if you're trying to grow in forgiveness, for example, you just pick some small thing that somebody did once that's still on your heart. And there's a professor, Dr. Everett Worthington, down in Richmond, Virginia, who spent his whole life studying forgiveness from a social science perspective. A beautiful job. And he has a whole kind of program you can go through, but there are little steps that you take. And this is true with all the virtues. There's always something very small that you can do, and do it every day until it becomes easy. And the first day is always the hardest. And then you move to the next step, and you move to the next step. And I have a line in the book where I say, beginning is winning. Because the beauty is, even that first step is already making you a little happier, you know. So it may take you the rest of your life, but the progress is joyful all along the way, you know.
Even starting this progress, even starting this whole direction in life, thinking how can I get better, and then taking steps, requires the virtue of humility and builds it up. Just to even consider
even considering it and being open to the fact that I could grow, you know. There is room for me to be improved.
And then the virtue of hope.
Yes, to know that, and I think knowing about the virtues and knowing these possibilities, they actually give a certain natural hope as well, right? Because look, things can be better.
And patience. Guys, this is something we lack with ourselves too. I mean, people don't want to start because it's like, gosh, changing takes so long. I mean, the amount of times I've confessed the same thing, and it's like, but I do perceive a movement in myself. It's like I'm going up a mountain that's 1 inch at a time.
Yes.
But just, I guess, you know, it comes back down to faith and knowing the Lord loves me, and as I try to progress, He's with me right in this step, and here we are.
But you will see, like, if you pick a small enough thing, a small enough step, you will actually see progress right away. So, for example, I had, I'm reasonably good with the virtue of orderliness, which is the habit of kind of doing the right things at the right times in the right places. I used to be awful. I used to be one of those students when I was younger who I didn't do something until it was absolutely necessary, or until I felt like it, you know. A very bad way to run your life, you know. Yeah. But over the years I've been able to grow that virtue, but I still had a pretty messed up morning routine. Like many people, the first thing I did was pick up my phone in the morning. What disasters happened last night? What do I need to do? I hate when I do
that to my brain.
It's a terrible way to start the day. So this was literally about a month ago. I thought, wait, you know, we have the technology, we have the knowledge, we can fix this, you know. Yeah. So I started. I mentioned to you before, we have an app that goes with the book. So I was like, okay, I'm go back to this. I want help in using the virtue of orderliness, growing to have an orderly morning routine. I want to get up, I want to exercise, pray, shower, and only then look at the phone. So that's my first hour of the day.
That's great.
That was a month ago. The first few days, it was like, right?
Yeah.
But fortunately, the app, the first thing I see when I pick up the phone is the app saying, hey, orderliness, right? So,
you see your own app.
Yes, exactly. Telling me, no, you're not supposed to be doing this. Oh, thank you. Put the phone down. This morning, yesterday morning, day before, it's now a habit. It is now a habit.
Cool.
I don't have to, the phone is not calling me anymore. You know,
that's
it's
great.
The coolest thing. 1 month, you know, and I'm an old guy, so a younger person could do this even quicker.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah.
Tell us about the app. There's a great business book that talks about focusing on not in the gap but the gain, right?
Yeah.
That you could focus all the time, and it's especially the tendency of a driven Type A personality to focus in the gap.
Yeah.
Whether it's with your business or your personal growth.
Yeah.
And to see, well, that's where I want to be. I want to be that saint. I want to be that guy. And then you get frustrated and give up.
No.
But I think things like the app is just ways to celebrate the little things and say, here's the gain. Like you could just say this is not common. You just told me how over the past 4 weeks you grew in a virtue.
Yes. Yeah.
Most people aren't even aware. They're not even on that journey. But if they are and they're trying, they're not able to see it. I try to be intentional with my own children. I have one kid who's very, very impulsive. Actually, a handful of them. I wonder where they got that from. Dad's ADD brain is living inside of them. But I try to call it out, like, hey, you just really controlled yourself in that fight with your brother just now. Good. Way to go.
Okay, yeah.
You know, and she can say, hey, here's how I've grown. Yeah. But your app helps people do this. Tell us what you're doing. Yeah,
so what the app does, because some people refer to virtues as ideals. I don't like that, because it makes it seem like it's a never-ending journey, you know. But every step of progress is worth celebrating, you know, and is going to make you happier. It's not like until I get there, I won't be happy. It's like every step is going to make me happier today than I was yesterday. So what the app does is there's a little kind of diagnostic tool, answer a bunch of questions, and it will give you a rating, personally, private to you, about how you're doing on all these different virtues. So then you pick one of the ones where you're weakest. Yeah. Because that's important. The positive psychology people will tell you, take the virtues that you have, the best ones, and then use them more. Huh. That's so crazy. Yeah. It's like, okay, so let's say you're suffering, let's say you're really poor in honesty. Oh, you can ignore that and just focus on the fact that you are more generous. Keep lying to people, but just be generous. Like, no, that doesn't make sense.
Totally.
So the app does the opposite. It says, okay, find the things that you're weakest in, and then it's trained on, it's an AI app, so you can talk to it or text to it, and it will suggest things you can do daily, like little daily practices. But you can argue with it and go, no, that's too hard for me. I don't want to do that. Or that's annoying, or give me something else. So it'll finally give you something that's a step that is not going to take you, that's not going to be too hard, but is still going to move you forward, like a little thing, you know?
And you can track your progress.
And then it will remind you every day, and then you can click and you can see progress. And then after a few days or weeks, you say, okay, give me something harder now, because this is now a habit.
Boy,
right?
That's cool.
And so then once a week, it'll ask you, are you finding it easier this week? Is your life happier this week?
Hey there, I just want to share something really important with you guys real quick. You know what's crazy? This entire show, every episode, every conversation, every life changed only happens because of our supporters. The Chris Stefanick Show is powered by people like you, people who believe in spreading the joy of the gospel. Now here's the deal. Each year we reach millions of people, but there are millions more that have not received not just the good, but the great news of the gospel. We want to reach those people, walk with them, and that's where you come in. When you become a monthly donor, a missionary of joy, you're not just donating, you're actually making this mission possible. You're helping us bring the hope, truth, and joy of the gospel to a world that desperately needs it. And that's not all. As a missionary of joy, you get exclusive access to all our video series, including Living Joy, Rise, Renewed, Fearless, and more. You get exclusive early access to new releases. You get Monday motivation texts direct from me. And you get access to our daily anchor, daily inspiration to fuel your faith. The truth is, the gospel is too good to keep to ourselves. If this show or our work has encouraged you, challenged you, or strengthened your faith, imagine how many more lives we can change together. Don't just watch the mission, fuel it. Click the link below and become a monthly donor today. It'll be the best investment you make this year.
Okay, this is just getting better, you know. So the app is called Grow Virtue because it helps you grow virtue, right? So
we're going to link to it below this video as well. Well done on that.
Yeah, it's
Praise
fun.
God, man, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I want to rip through some of the virtues you cover in your book, and just we could just list them, but you also feel free to stop me anytime you want to say, "Ooh, I'm excited about it. I want to share something about that one." So restraint, and we just talked about that. Humility, we talked about that. Diligence.
Let's stop. Okay, stop there. Because I would say two things. I would say something about diligence, but I would say something about the sequence. So the reason I have them in that order, so all the first few chapters are all self-discipline virtues. And they're in a particular order. They're the order that Aquinas gives them. And the book is in this order on purpose, because it was, I think, Augustine who first pointed this out, that even though we talk about the four cardinal virtues as prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance, and I want to say more about the definitions of each, but so prudence is about our thoughts, about making decisions, right? Justice about our actions, fortitude, courage about our fears, and temperance or self-discipline about our desires.
And
even though we
no rush. Say whatever you want about any of these.
okay,
yeah.
so we put them in that sequence of 4.
Yep.
And I want to say in a moment why those 4, because that's a really important story. And we do put them in that order because prudence is the most important. So the wise decision making, practical wisdom is a better translation, is the most important thing, right? Because you may be very courageous and you may be self-disciplined, but if you make dumb decisions, you're going to use those poorly, you know. Augustine says that's the correct hierarchy in terms of importance, but in terms of development, you more or less want to flip it. You
Wow.
want to start with self-discipline. Because
Wow.
if you have no self-discipline, nothing else matters. You are a prey to your feelings. You are a slave to your feelings, right? So we want to start there. And then once you have self-discipline, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you have enough basic self-discipline, then the next one is courage, fortitude. Because if you don't have that, then every time you hit an obstacle, you stop. So that's the next thing to develop. And then after that, justice and prudence, kind of those are important. But so the book begins with self-discipline. And those 3 virtues and the ones that follow are kind of an on-ramp to the life of virtue. So I really like restraint is a really good beginner virtue.
Yeah.
You know, like if you don't know where to begin with restraint. Because if you don't have restraint, you're spending your day frivolously. Like,
Put the Doritos down, man.
Yeah, right?
It starts the simple things.
Exactly. So we talked about restraint. We talked about humility. So both of those are about the desire to do things. I mentioned diligence. I love this one, and as a professor, I see the value of this with our students and anybody who has kids, but even for adults themselves. The virtue of diligence. There's a sort of white-knuckling analogy to that as well. Right? Be diligent. Do your homework. Study. That's how you grow in diligence. No, right? So Aquinas said, if you want to grow in diligence, the way to do it is find a way to fall in love with your subject. Take your natural curiosity and direct it towards the subject that you want to study.
Wow.
Don't waste your natural curiosity on useless stuff like doom scrolling and social media, right? And so he says that those are there's a way to grow in diligence and a way to harm it. The way to harm it is to chase after frivolous stuff.
Wow.
And the way to grow in diligence is redirect your interests to the thing that you need to study.
I love Aquinas.
He's such a genius.
Yeah.
He's such a great saint. And so diligence, for me, is kind of almost symbolic for this idea that as you grow in virtue, life gets easier. It's not a matter of studying harder. It's a matter of refocusing. So instead of, I'm curious about this, become curious about calculus. Like, why did people come up with calculus? What does it allow you to do? Oh, now it's actually more interesting, and you're more inclined to want to learn it,
Gosh, if I could keep this in mind in parenting too,
Yeah,
and avoiding the extremes, like you said, that
Yep.
the vices are on each side.
Yeah.
That one extreme would say, just destroy the curiosity part of your brain. No, don't do that.
Don't do that. Yeah.
It's a gift.
Yeah. And the other is make everything miserable by just study, and then you hate school. How good
Yeah.
is that, So no, it's very powerful stuff.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love what you did with this next one.
Okay.
Gentle firmness.
Gentle firmness.
That's really helped me, this wording.
Good.
I almost want to push for translations of the Bible that use this. Go.
Thank you. So gentle firmness, the word is meekness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So keep mentioning this sort of semantic drift. The word meek, for most people, means be like a sheep, right? Be a
rhymes with
pushover,
weak.
right? It sounds weak. So meekness, weakness, right? Sound. That's not what it means. So Christ says, "Be like me. I am meek and humble of heart." He's not weak. He's the most powerful being in the universe. What do I do? Do I try to teach people that the word meek means something better, or do I come up with a different word? So I came up with a different word, gentle firmness. Actually, here's why I had to do it. So part of writing this book, the most fun part for me, and this is a little nerdy, I confess, is going back to the original Latin names for each of the virtues, and then looking for better English translations. Because of the problem with temperance,
that's
I mentioned,
cool.
And there was actually a really cool book. There's a dictionary, Latin, English, only goes that way, and it's just for reading St. Thomas. And the nice thing about it was written by, or developed by, one of I used to be provost of Catholic University, predecessor of provost from the 1950s, Dr. Roy D. Ferrari, brilliant guy, had 5 different doctorates or something.
Wow.
So he wrote this dictionary. So thank you, Dr. Ferrari. I'm going through the dictionary looking for translations. So, but for meekness, there's not much. The Latin word is mansuetudo. So there is an
Mansuetudo.
English word, mansuetude. Does that help us? Has anyone ever heard that word? Doesn't help us, right? Okay, so what do we do? Well, what is true meekness? True meekness is having strength and gentleness at the same time. Gentleness and firmness at the same time. Gentle firmness. So I just made up the word.
I love it.
It is the virtue principally for dealing with anger. So it's another one of these self-discipline virtues, right? And it helps us. So what is anger? Anger is the result of, so these are all related to desire, right? Where's the desire? It's the desire for things to be a certain way. When that desire is foiled, we get angry. That's the source of, that causes anger, right?
Wow.
This is happening. I don't think it should be happening. I want this. I didn't get it. I get angry.
I want to make it right. I have an emotion to push me to make it right.
Exactly, right? So what are the two extremes? One is I just let the feeling of anger run and I blow up, right? That doesn't help anybody. That's the gentleness out the window, right?
Yeah.
The other extreme is I'm going to stifle my anger, keep it inside me, and just kind of surrender, right? That's the firmness out the window, right? You need both. And so the visual I like is the kind of the steel fist inside the velvet glove, right? You're firm, unyielding, but in a gentle way. It is such an important virtue in society, particularly important for parents, right? Because our kids drive us nuts sometimes.
Wow.
But it's not good for them, either for us to blow up at them, is harmful, right? It's not good for us to lose our temper with our kids. As much as they seem to deserve it sometimes, I'm just kidding. But it's also not good for us to give in to them all the time, right? They have to be gentle and firm. So it's just a really a beautiful virtue that was stuck with a bad name.
And it's
like a new
it's
name.
walking right down the middle. That's where the glory is found.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that. Forgiveness, orderliness. Okay, this one is my favorite. I wrote about this in my book, Living Joy. And I hadn't heard about this until I started researching fun.
Yeah.
And there's a virtue of fun.
There is
It's
a
the most
virtue of
important
fun.
virtue people never heard of. Eutropelia.
Eutropelia is there isn't an English word, there isn't even a Latin word. So we use the Greek word eutropelia, which originally means in Greek wittiness, but it's so much bigger than that. It's basically the habit of having good fun, right? Good leisure. And Aquinas is so genius on this. He observes, he says, look, when we're physically tired, all we have to do is stop moving.
Wow.
Sit down, lie down, and we rest, right?
Yeah.
But when we are emotionally, psychologically, mentally, spiritually tired, how do you rest? When your mind is tired, how do you rest? Go to sleep? The mind keeps ticking over. We're dreaming, REM sleep, right? How do you ever rest? And he says, genius, he has this beautiful line. He says, enjoyment is rest for the soul. This is Aquinas. You can make a bumper sticker out of this.
Enjoyment is rest for the soul.
And then he explains why. He says, because our minds are purpose-seeking organisms, right? They're always trying to solve problems, always trying to achieve something. Wow. So the only time your mind is not trying to achieve something is when you're doing something that you love just for its own sake, because there's nothing to achieve now. And whether it's going out for a hike in the mountains or having a meal with friends or playing a game, reading a good book, playing guitar, something that you just love for its own sake. Now, there may be other reasons. You have a good meal with friends, you're going to get fed. That's good, But what's the primary reason you're doing this? And this is, so we use the app in businesses as well. So we have a lot of data from companies. Yeah. And this is one that scores really badly.
I'm sure.
Right? Because you think about how we live. We go out, we socialize in order to network. Right? Yeah. We work out in order to be healthier and stronger. We read in order to improve ourselves. It's like, when do we do something just for its own sake? And this is a virtue. This is part of a well-lived human life. So I think it's such an important one. In the book, I give an analogy. Maybe you remember the ad from Staples, the easy button, easy, you press it and it gets done. Yeah. The analogy with eutropelia is if you're about to do something and you think, oh, this is going to be my eutropelia for this day or this week, you ask yourself, if I could get the normal result of doing this thing by pushing a button, would I push the button? So I'm going to the gym to work out, right? Yeah. The normal result of going to the gym to work out is you get a little healthier. If I could get that health benefit by just pushing a button, would I do it? And if the answer is yes, it's not eutropelia. You may enjoy going to the gym, but that's not the main reason you're going, and therefore it's not eutropelia. You have to find something that you love doing.
There's a power in that. Because we really forget that we have inherent value when we don't do that. That's why it's going to score badly in the business world. Lots of people are successful because they've made themselves tools. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I fall into that myself, man.
We're all subject to this temptation, so it's just nice to go back to Aquinas.
I was just reading recently how back in the 80s, if there was a commercial showing successful people that wanted to sell something, so you associate, that luxury with that product, and those commercials were always someone on a yacht sipping champagne, and then they're wearing a nice watch. Now, fast forward to 2025, it's someone racing down a hallway, his secretary's following him, taking notes. He's like, and he's got the watch on. He's getting on his private jet. It's like we've completely lost Eutropilia.
Yeah. It's sad.
It is. It's crazy.
It's one of my favorites. As you know, I grew up in the Mediterranean on a small island, so sitting by the beach is our highest form of existence. I love Eutropilia, but it's so nice to have language around it and to explain the benefit and the science. Because again, if you go to the positive psychology research, it's good for your health. It's good for your happiness. It's like this is good stuff.
Ironically, makes you more successful.
Ultimately, yes, but don't let that be the reason, because then you'd undermine it all.
Dang it! Right? It's a big tightrope walk.
Yeah.
Discipline, courage, wisdom, justice.
So those are then the 4 final chapters, right? So the original vision for this book was, so Aquinas, I'll say more about this in a moment, has 50 different virtues, right? That they roll up to, in many cases, these cardinal virtues. And so I thought, okay, a chapter on each one. Because in each chapter I tell some stories about it, I summarize the modern research on it, say what Aquinas says, and gives you a few tips on how to start. So I did that for the first several chapters, and I took those drafts with me to, do you know Catholic Family Land?
Oh, yeah. So, I used to cut their grass.
Thank you.
When I was a college kid at Franciscan University in the summers, I would go cut grass at Catholic Family Land.
We've been going there 20-some years. Our kids love it.
We'll link to them below the video, too.
Yes, so we love Catholic Family Land. So I was there a couple of years ago, summers, and I was working on some of these chapters, not supposed to be, but I was taking the mornings to do a bit of work. And I shared them with some friends, the first 5 chapters. And I said, tell me, you sit anxiously, what do you think? And they're like, we love them, these are great. Cool. These are honest friends, who tell me the truth. I was like, oh, good. Would you read 45 more chapters like that? Because it's 50 verses. And they're like, no. It's like, darn, what am I going to do?
You gotta have honest friends.
Yeah, it helps. So what we ended up doing was the first several chapters are these individual, the different virtues of self-discipline. But then the last 4 are the 4 cardinal virtues that sort of tie them all together. And then each chapter takes a large story and goes through all the allied virtues of. So I give you an example of.
So all of them come from those 4, or rooted in one of those 4 in some way.
And let me say how that works, but I'll give you an example from. So practical wisdom or prudence, the habit of making wise decisions. So there's a chapter on that. It has 8 allied virtues. So if you want to make wise decisions, you have to have a good memory. So Aquinas lists that actually as a virtue. But you think about it, the more you practice remembering things, the more you remember. So it does certainly like.
There's the one virtue I might get worse at as the years go by.
We all do, but you can keep working it, right? So there are 4 virtues for gathering information, 2 for existing information, 2 for new. The existing information one is memory, the other one's called judgment, which is the habit of knowing which principles to bring to bear on a decision. And then the 2 for new are, one is I call teachability. The classic word is docility from docilitas, but again, docility means like be docile, What docilitas really means is being teachable, being good at learning things. So you're a good listener. People like to teach you, And then the other one is creativity. So those 4. Then you have one virtue called reasoning, which is how to process it all, being kind of good at logical thinking and so on. And then 3, this is, again, the ancient wisdom. It's like not enough to make a decision. You have to be sure that it can be implemented, because a decision not implemented is not really made. This is Aquinas, right? 750 years ago. It's
amazing.
And so those 3 are what he calls, what I call alertness. And it's basically being aware of what's changing around you. Preparedness, which is being aware of what might go wrong with my decision and anticipating that. And then the last one should be first is foresight, which is goal setting. Just having the right goals so your decisions are aligned with those goals. Anyway, so what I did with the chapter on practical wisdom is take you through those 8, but seen through the eyes of Captain Sullenberger. Do you remember Flight 1549, the landing on the Hudson River?
Oh,
right?
yeah.
They ran into a bunch of birds, both engines knocked out, a 1 in a billion chance.
Yep.
What do? He had 3.5 minutes from that knockout to when they would have crash landed and killed who knows how many people in Manhattan below them. So I go through. I actually use the accident report to figure out kind of what was happening second by second, and I show how each of those 8 virtues came into play at different moments.
Wow.
To allow him to make all those fast decisions to be able to land the plane. Because he had to decide, do I go back to this airport? Do I go to Teterboro? Do I go to Newark? Do I have enough fuel? Do I have enough, not fuel, do I have enough momentum,
Yeah.
Can I land on a street below me? Can I land on the water? Should it be on the Hudson? Should it be on the other side? Like all these decisions. 3.5 minutes is not a long time. At some point in the book, I say at this point, more than 3.5 minutes have passed if you're an average reader. The plane has already crashed, right? So I do that with the last 4 chapters. Each one has its own story, and I'm kind of going through. So instead of getting a whole chapter on each virtue, you get a few paragraphs, but it shows how it all gets integrated.
Got to be digestible.
Exactly.
Because you have wisdom.
Well, that's what it's trying to show.
And the humility to ask friends for help in the
And
formation
get
of
good
your
feedback,
book.
right?
See
Exactly.
the practical application of these virtues immediately.
Exactly. Yeah. So here's the big question: is why do we have the 4 cardinal virtues?
Yeah,
right? Prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance. Why? Aquinas has the best answer for this. In effect, he says, in addition to our spiritual lives and our intellectual lives, each have their own virtues, right? Spiritual life, faith, hope, and charity, the theological virtues. Our everyday practical lives, Aquinas says, basically the core functions of our everyday lives are our intellect, our will, and our passions. I use more conventional terms. I talk about thoughts, actions, feelings, right? I've already mentioned those. So if you think about it, your everyday lives, other than your spiritual life and your intellectual life, and he's not making a separation here. He's not arguing we're just distinguishing for the purpose of understanding better. If you think about it, everyday living, thoughts, actions, feelings, is there anything else? No. Right? We're thinking, we're moving, we're experiencing our emotions. So then he points out, okay, so prudence, I prefer practical wisdom, so prudentia, translated as practical wisdom, is the habit of making wise decisions. When we're thinking in our day-to-day lives, it's usually for the purpose of making a decision. What shall I wear? What shall I eat? What shall I say? What do I do next, right? So if you have the virtue of practical wisdom, the virtue of prudence, then your thinking is going to be ordered well, right? It's going to be effective. You're going to make good decisions. Justice is the virtue of the habit of treating others fairly and respecting their dignity. And most of our actions throughout the day are interactions with others, most of the time, right? There's somebody else. And so if we have the virtue of justice, we are interacting well with others. So now our thoughts and our actions are in good shape. And then for feelings, Aquinas says, let's make a clear distinction between feelings that move us towards things or situations and feelings that push us away. So feelings that move towards are our desires, things that push away are our fears, right? He talks about the irascible and concupiscible passions, but I prefer to talk about fears and desires. Close enough, more comprehensible, And so then courage is the habit of not letting fear get in the way of what you intend to do. It's not the habit of not having fear. That's not within anyone's control. Fear just happens. Courage is, I'm going to reframe it as a challenge and move forward. And then self-discipline, we talked about before, or temperance, is the habit of only following your desires when it makes sense. So now you know why those 4 virtues are so important, because if you have practical wisdom, justice, courage, self-discipline, every aspect of your day-to-day living, your thoughts, your actions, and feelings, are excellent. Because you've got these habits of excellence, right? How exciting that is. So that was Aquinas' kind of big insight number 1. Big insight number 2 is the thing you alluded to before, which is each one of those is a big virtue. A big heavy lift. It's the 300 pounds on day 1. No, I can't do that, right? So the easy way in is the allied virtues. So the 8 that lead up to practical wisdom. There's the 15 that make up.
It's incredible.
And so pick which one. Can I show the picture? This won't work for those listening, but for those.
And while you're looking that up, I'm just the brilliance. I mean, the level of thought that Aquinas had, and just
to put it all together.
Right, and it's all rooted. Unlike a lot of self-help or even things in psychology, that this is so directly rooted in what we are and how we experience life. this isn't just a disconnected philosophical pursuit. This is Aquinas praying and thinking through his experience of humanity. And this is not just Aquinas, but the ancients. And this is developed over
millennia.
Millennia, yeah.
Well, you hit the nail on the head when you said it's kind of what we are. And we were the Chesterton quote that you gave before, it's really helpful, I think, to think of the virtues as muscles, right? It's kind of psychological, spiritual muscles, because they're not outside things that we adopt. They're already in us. So
that's cool.
I have a friend
That's
who's a teacher at the Heights, which is this boys' school outside of Washington, D.C., Opus Dei boys, fabulous school. My boys went there. And he's also the coach for the climbing team. And he was telling me how every year, new crew of boys go climbing for the first time. The next morning, he says, invariably they come to me and say, "Sir, muscles I didn't even know I had are aching me," right? We've had this experience. Well,
most days when you're 50.
Right. Well, they become your friends. Well, the virtues are muscles you didn't even know you had. They're already in there as part of our human nature. Wow. So when somebody says, "Well, I'm not very creative," it's no, the creativity muscle is already in you. You just have to exercise it. "I'm not very courageous." The muscle is there. You just have to. It's such an optimistic view. And Aquinas saw all of that, and he tied it into this whole system that has not been replicated before or since, superseded. So 750 years ago, he laid this out, but it was more or less kind of hidden in plain sight. Wow. Everybody else, I think, looks at the Summa Theologica, the treatise on the virtues, and sees a list of virtues. And I started, I'll eventually hold this up.
Yeah. We'll share it on the screen too.
Great, okay, yeah. I started to notice this when I'm reading different books about the virtues, written by good, faithful authors who are highly intelligent. Donald DeMarco, for example, brilliant book on the virtues. Romano Guardini, brilliant book on the virtues. My former boss, John Garvey, beautiful book on the virtues. And I'm reading these are lovely, but wait, they each have a different list. There's some overlap.
Yeah.
But wait, if this is so important, how come we don't have a fixed list? It's like, imagine reading different books about chemistry, and each one has a different periodic table. Yeah. Like, this one doesn't have iron in it. This one is missing sodium. It's like, what's going on?
Start doubting the book.
Yeah, you would, wouldn't you? And so I was chatting with Joe Capizzi, who's now the dean of theology at Catholic U. And I said, "Joe, hasn't somebody done this before? Isn't there like a definitive list of the virtues?" And he said, "Oh, you should read this by Father Urbanus Cesario." So he has a wonderful book called The Virtues or the Examined Life. So I'm reading that book. And it's basically a guide to reading Aquinas' treatise on the virtues.
Wow.
So then I go back to the treatise and I'm looking more carefully and I realize, oh my gosh, Aquinas isn't just giving you a list. He's done something that no one has ever done before or since. He's actually giving you a map. Wow. A map of, in a sense, the human soul, right? Because he's showing how all the virtues fit together in a way that you know that there's nothing missing and nothing overlapping here. Wow. So we know that the virtues that he lists is a complete list. You could invent or find other virtues, but they would be subsets of one that he already has. Yeah. So there's nothing missing. So what I tried to do is I drew a sort of picture, right, of all of that.
My gosh, phenomenal work.
And a little overwhelming at first sight, but the 50 virtues are around the outside. And,
wow.
And basically, I start in the center with the kind of whole of human life. And this is what Aquinas does, is every ring that you go out is a distinction that Aquinas makes. So the first distinction is between supernatural and natural. So then you've got the theological virtues. Then on the natural level, you've got the intellectual and practical. And so you've got intellectual virtues. And then on the practical life, you have the thoughts, actions, feelings. And then
phenomenal
you have
work,
and you keep kind of subdividing until you get all of these. And the reason I draw it as a circle, I used to draw it as a tree.
Yeah.
Right? And the medievals would you've probably seen pictures of the tree of virtues, right? And this is another good friend who tells me the truth.
Those are the best kinds of friends. I don't always like them, but I love them.
Right. And so his name is John, and I said, "John, I'm so excited about this project I'm doing about the virtues and Aquinas." And I started describing it. And I said, and I'm visualizing it to show how they all fit together. He goes, "Oh, I'm so excited." So let me show it to you. And I reach into my bag to pull it out. And he goes, "Oh, I'm so excited. I hope it's not some dumb tree or something."
It's a tree.
It's a tree. "John, it's a tree. Thanks, buddy." So it looks like a squash ladder. It's like, So, you're right. So back to the drawing board, spent a lot of time thinking and praying about it. And then one day the
God
visual
bless
of a
John.
circle kind of just came out. And the circle is so much better. He's right. It's so much better than the tree. Because in a tree, you can always imagine another branch, right, coming out.
Yeah.
But the circle says
complete.
this is complete. This is complete.
It helps so much with teaching anything too. When people say I'm spiritual but not religious, when you understand that religiosity is a subset virtue under justice, it puts religion in a whole new light.
Exactly.
That justice is giving someone their due. Religion is tangible ways that you're giving God what's due to Him.
Precisely.
When kids don't get that, when they're not formed in virtue, they go to college and think, I still believe in God. I just don't go to church. Well, hold on.
Yeah.
You actually owe it to God.
To go to church, right?
There's a relationship where you owe something to the supreme being. They have no sense of justice connected with faith formation. It's incredible. This impacts so many areas of life. And it just needed, a lot of this stuff just needed a translator, because there's a lot, which is what you are.
This is exactly the work I've been doing, is translation.
Right? And not just translator linguistically, but in modern, a way the postmodern mind can understand and grasp on and say, okay, I want this.
Yeah.
Because there's so much that comes out in modern psychology and business leadership and all this, as you're tapping into in this conversation, that a well-formed philosophical, theological Catholic mind is going to hear it and say, yeah, we've been, don't pat yourself in the back, buddy. We've been doing that for 800 years.
Yes.
2,000 years.
Yeah.
Or wait, go back before Jesus. I mean, this has been around. But it just needed a translator, right?
Yeah, well, a perfect example of exactly what you're talking about is some years ago. So I spent several years working for the consulting firm McKinsey & Company before my academic life. And so I still read the McKinsey Quarterly, which is a good, their kind of house journal. They do really good research. And I'm reading an article where they're talking about what they call the distinct elements of talent. And they say, these are underlying all employee skills. Companies of the future are going to need these distinct elements of talent in their employees. I mean, what are these? They are courage and self-discipline and humility. Like, oh, that looks familiar.
You owe Aquinas a royalty, buddy. Yeah.
And then Deloitte, another consulting firm, had its own article, actually came out before the McKinsey one, and they called them core capabilities. What are these capabilities? Well, self-discipline and humility. And it's like, wait a second, the world is kind of rediscovering this, not even knowing what they're doing. Same with the positive psychology. They're kind of off a little bit. I mean, they do really good research, but they're just kind of off. So I thought it's time to just show everybody that we've known this all along and just kind of get this kind of restoration of the language of virtue. You know?
I'm going to be praying for your work to keep exploding. There's also something we're up against in the presumption that things that came before us are dated. It's funny. In the West, we do this. In the Western world, we do this. But not so much when it comes to indigenous cultures. We want ancient wisdom.
That's right. That's
what
right.
the heck? What are we missing out in here? Like, there's a lot we're missing. The ancient wisdom that arose from the Western world is also completely profound and applicable today.
Completely, because when you think of every great civilization had a virtue tradition, right?
Yeah.
It's the best the human person can be.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you want that tradition? I start the book
Machu Picchu.
With my
That was a great start.
Okay.
I read the book.
I know. I could tell. But thanks for bringing that up, because I thought it was such a good analogy. So the earthquake, 1950, right?
Yeah.
In Cusco, which is not far from Machu Picchu, leveled Cusco, like flattened the place, right? Terrible. Quite a bit of loss of life. By the grace of God, a good chunk of the population were out watching a soccer game, a major soccer game. So they were outdoors, and that saved many, many lives. But Machu Picchu, same earthquake, same area, barely touched. Why? Because the ancients had figured out, in their case, they're 500 years ago, but they had figured out how to build without mortar, right? So that the blocks can shift a little bit, and instead of cracking and breaking and collapsing, they just shift a little bit. And that now architects and engineers in San Francisco have been studying this to say, hey, we need to rediscover this ancient wisdom and build buildings that can resist earthquakes like they did, like the Incans did, you know? And so I use that story to say, yeah, ancient wisdom, good idea, you know? Here's some really powerful ancient wisdom that we need to recover.
So maybe someday all of San Francisco will reopen their Bible too.
We can pray for that.
Amen. Lest we lose hope on the journey to developing virtue, I want one last question for you here. You broke it into phases that you experience as you develop virtue, and knowing the phase you're on really helps you be patient, and gives you insight into the fact that I'm actually going somewhere. It's okay to be in phase 1. Oh, cool! I just made it to phase 2. You know, how do you break these phases apart?
So this is actually from the ancients. They observe rightly that you can't just go from vice to virtue, because of the power of habit, right? If you have a strong bad habit, you can't just flip it and then it becomes a strong good habit. There are 2 intermediate stages. So there's 4 phases as overall. So vice is the first, virtue is the last. The 2 intermediate ones have the unfortunate names incontinence and continence, right? So we're talking about semantic drift here.
I'm hoping you came up with a new language around that, but what are we going to do?
Yes, because I mean here the semantic drift has gone all the way into the toilet, right? Because incontinence, we know what that means to us now. But the Latin word incontinentia meant kind of a lack of self-control. And continentia was self-control. So I knew I couldn't really use those words because people just wouldn't take it seriously, you know? Yeah. So, but fortunately, there is a 4-part schema that trainers use to describe development of skills, which I think works really well in this case. And I can illustrate it best with an analogy. Imagine somebody who's trying to grow in the virtue of honesty. Imagine somebody in a really bad shape who has the vice of dishonesty, who's always lying, you know. And some of us know some people like this, you know. They can never tell the truth. They'll say whatever they think will get them what they need, right? So that's a vice. And the first step in this scheme is what we'll call unconscious incompetence. So with respect to honesty, this person is totally incompetent, right? They cannot do an honest thing or say an honest thing, but they are unconscious about it. They don't realize. Wow. They don't realize that they don't have this virtue. They don't care. They probably even think that people who tell the truth are stupid, suckers, right? Like, you're a sucker, you tell me the truth, I'm going to tell you what's going to benefit me, you know? So there you're stuck in unconscious incompetence.
We've all been there. In our worst states of sin, what Aquinas says, sin darkens the intellect. I think in my dumbest days, where I just thought I had it all together, and that was a complete mess.
Complete mess. But then let's say, by the grace of God, you know, this guy, our hypothetical guy, starts to realize, how come I don't have any friends anymore? How come no one wants to do business with me? Yeah. Maybe I should start telling the truth. So that moves him to conscious incompetence. He starts trying to tell the truth, but the pull of the vice, the pull of the old bad habit is strong. And so he fails more often than not. He's trying to tell the truth, but often ends up lying. Yeah. Especially in a pinch, you know, he'd lie to get out of a difficult situation. But if he continues to try and continues to practice telling the truth, this is the optimistic thing, eventually he gets to the 3rd phase, which is conscious competence, right? He's now generally more often than not telling the truth, but it's still a struggle.
Conscious competence.
He has to think about it. He has to work at it, but he's telling the truth. We would look at him and say, this is a truthful person, right? He tells the truth. That's good. And that's where most modern ethics ends. And it looks like a journey of struggle, but at the height of that journey of struggle, you're a good person. Carry on struggling, you know. But for us, it doesn't end there. The 4th step is virtue, right?
Glory to glory.
Unconscious competence. Right? Because now you tell the truth. You don't even stop to think, should I tell the truth? No, it's me. I'm a truthful person. I'm an honest person. I don't even think about it anymore. It's easy to tell the truth now. Isn't that beautiful?
That's incredible.
So it's a very optimistic story. So as you're going through those...
You're now skating on ice instead of climbing a mountain. It's beautiful.
It's a very optimistic message. And so when it feels a tough struggle, you know it's going to get easier. But the thing is, there are victories all along the way. When you pick a little thing and you just practice that little thing gets easy very quickly. So it's not a question of 30 years. I used to joke that an earlier version of this book could be called How to Be Happy in 30 Years or Less. You know, or more. No, you don't have to wait that long. Yeah. It's like today, tomorrow, you can start to feel happier by just taking these little steps. So.
Wow. So list again. Those are the 3 phases, or 4. I'm sorry. How many phases?
There are 4. So unconscious incompetence. Don't know how bad you are. Conscious incompetence. Yep. I know how bad I am. Or I'm bad at the thing that we're talking about. Conscious competence. I'm now good at it. And then unconscious competence. I do it. I don't have to think about it.
I wonder if the secular world stops halfway when they talk about ethics, because without the help of grace, there's only so far you can get. What's the interplay of divine grace with all this striving?
This is probably the most important thing we talk about today, because Aristotle's project ultimately fails, right? He introduced us to virtue. He had the Nicomachean Ethics is all about virtue, and it's all about habits, right? Practicing the habits that make you virtuous. But in the end, original sin knocks us down. You can never become truly, fully virtuous on your own strength. You just can't do it. Original sin will just get in the way, right? And so then you give up. But what happens is grace that Christ has won for us, in effect, allows us to participate in his virtues. So when I'm growing in courage, it's his courage that I'm growing into, you know? And so there's a medieval theologian by the name of John of St. Thomas, appropriately, who gives this beautiful analogy. He says, when we're trying to grow in virtue, on a human level, it's like rowing a boat. So I'm getting stronger, boat is moving faster, I'm heading in the right direction. But then when grace comes in, it's like hoisting a sail. Same direction, moving faster, but it's easier, it's less effort. And what it does is it elevates the virtue to a supernatural level. Even the four cardinal virtues. You know, obviously the faith, hope, and charity, those are only infused, right? They're just we can't by our own effort grow in faith. That's a gift. But the cardinal virtues and the allied virtues, what grace does is it lifts it up to a point that is supernatural. So the martyr, for example, is showing supernatural courage. On a natural level, it's really hard and rare to die for somebody else. Even harder to die for what might just seem like an idea, right? For a faith, right? But with grace, we can do that. The same with practical wisdom. And the beauty of this is, existentially, we can experience this. If somebody who is striving to grow in each of these virtues and has a good prayer life and the sacraments and so on, there will be times in your life when, say, you face a difficult decision and you make a decision and you think, wow, that feels inspired. Well, because it was. That wasn't you, that was grace. You know?
Awesome.
Or likewise, you do something supremely courageous or something immensely disciplined, you know, and it felt easy. That was grace. It's beautiful, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, it's incredible. And you see it in the lives of the saints too. Now, of course, there's countless examples of Christians who have failed to live up to our ideal.
Sadly.
But our ideal is superhumanly high for a reason, because it's attainable by the help of grace.
Exactly.
I mean, you go to the most impoverished slums in Haiti, and if there's someone who's living there, giving their lives to service, it's probably a Christian, it's probably a Catholic, it's probably a religious.
Yeah.
In a habit, who's a nun or a brother, because there's a certain level of sacrifice that I'm not talking about a mission trip. I'm talking about
living there.
This is it.
Yeah.
This is it. This is where my life is now.
Yeah.
That's just impossible. It confounds the world. That's superhuman grace.
It is. I give you an even more
virtue on grace.
Elevated by grace, exactly. Yes, I give you an even more mundane example, because I live in the business world and business education. You know, running a business school, I get to meet many business people, a lot of virtuous business people, by the grace of God, and all of the research on business is very, very clear that if you want to be successful, if you want a company to be successful and make tons of money, you should be good to people. You be good to your employees, be good to your customers, be honest, you know, be just. There's tons of research on this, tons of research. It would be hard to disagree with it. And yet, so many businesses don't. When you look at the companies that do, year after year, decade after decade, they are usually run by people of faith. Even if very quiet about it, you know, could be Jewish, could be Protestant, could be Catholic, but they're usually run by people of
open
faith.
to grace.
Yeah, because without faith, you're just not going to persevere in that kind of trying to build up these habits of self-discipline and justice and so on. It's just a very interesting observation.
I just learned recently, this blew my mind, and I studied theology in school and been in ministry my entire life, but I didn't know this, that Pentecost Sunday was the day that the Jews celebrated the giving of the law and the Ten Commandments.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
But that imagery of that you have this fire from heaven, putting a law on tablets.
Yeah.
Fast forward, you have the fire from heaven etching a new law into the human heart and elevating the entire thing beyond where Aristotle could go, beyond where tablets could go.
Yeah.
and it's a new life. But wow, it gives me chills just thinking about that.
That's Thank you for
Right?
sharing.
Yeah. But you know, just as the human needs grace, so too the person who has grace accessible to him needs to get intentional about lifting the weight.
Yes.
Picking it up.
Exactly.
And so thanks for helping us get intentional about that. I want to end with this phenomenal quote by Cardinal Ratzinger, who became Benedict XVI. To evangelize means to show this path, to teach the art of living. At the beginning of his public ministry, Jesus says, I have come to evangelize the poor. This means I have the response to your fundamental questions. I will show you the path of life, the path toward happiness. Rather, I am that path. Praise God. So thanks for illuminating the path even more to us, not just to you know, grow in virtue, but this is really about becoming like Jesus and following him and becoming fully human, fully alive forever.
Amen.
And glorifying God and, frankly, enjoying life more along the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
God bless you, man. Thank you again.
Pleasure.
Yeah. And thank you guys for watching. We love you. Thanks for diving in to life with us. We'll see you next time.